What you call that noise?
The XTC Podcast.
XTClimelight.com.
What do you call that noise?
What do you call that noise?
Welcome back to What Do You Call That Noise, the XTC podcast, where we're turning our attention back to cover bands. My name is Mark Fisher, and I'm realizing how much the podcast has cover bands in its DNA. The very first episode in March 2020, just before the apocalypse hit, was about Garden of Earthly Delights, an anthology of XTC covers put together by Future Man Records. And later that year, we told the story of the cover band Ecstatic, which delighted fans in the UK between 2002 and 2005. And then in October 2021, we welcomed none other than Terry Chambers and Steve Tilling of XTC, who are a kind of cover band, even though they have XTC's original drummer in them. And we followed that up with XTC's bass player, Matt Hughes, earlier this year. But it doesn't stop there. Next month, we'll be talking to the members of Fossil Fools in advance of their appearance at the XTC convention in Swindon in September. And this month, we're in Australia in the company of the very fine Scarecrow People. Before I introduce them, I have to extend my customary thanks to the fantastic supporters on Patreon who make this podcast possible. It would be great if you could join them. All the details are at patreon.com/Mark Fisher, where you can choose your level of support and whether you should join the Pink Things, the Humble Daisies, or the Knights in Shining Karma. And if you choose to join the Knights in Shining Karma, I'll read out your name at the end of every episode. And don't forget that if you head to xtclimelight.com, you'll be able to buy a copy of What Do You Call That Noise, an XTC Discovery book. Among many other things, the 228-page book includes a chapter by David White about cover bands, who he found everywhere from Vancouver to Los Angeles and Japan. And one of the musicians David interviewed was Les Rankin, founder member of Scarecrow People, who is with us here today. Hello, Les.
Good evening. How's it going?
It's very good. Great to have you here. The full complement of Scarecrow People members runs to at least 7, possibly more. We can find that out. With Les today are guitarist John Encarnacao. Hello, John.
Hi.
Good to have you here. And Rob Child. Hello, Rob.
Hello.
Great to have you. Thank you very much for coming. Now, as we're speaking, you three are, I believe, building up to your gig at the Camelot Lounge, Marrickville in Sydney on Saturday, the 29th of October. Les, maybe you could tell us about what you've got in store for that gig and how it is that you keep on coming back to the Camelot Lounge.
They love us there. So our way into Camelot was pretty much via our drummer, Jess Champa, who's the busiest guy in the world. Hence his absence tonight. But he had a bit of a long-standing regular gig there. It's a nice little room, about 160 capacity, and it's definitely a sit down with shabby chic kind of vibe. I guess the clientele just they know to expect it's going to be quality stuff, not blasting at 130 decibels, and it's more of a sort of bohemian kind of vibe, really. But yeah, we've got a pretty regular, loyal following there, and we've tried it elsewhere, and it's been okay. But I think it's in Sydney's inner west. It just seems to be maybe there's a high concentration of XTC tragics in that area or something. I don't know what it is. John, any explanation?
I think that the crowd that goes to Camelot are fairly musically literate. So Camelot was established it's initially concentrated on world music and a bit of jazz. And I mean, increasingly there are more and more covers playing there, cover bands playing there. But I do think that the people that are on their mailing list are more likely to know of someone like XTC than the mailing lists of many other venues, just because of the way it's sort of built up around a clientele that's fairly musically literate.
And what do you think about the level of, if maybe even the word fame is not correct, the level of awareness of XTC in Australia? Because I can remember XTC doing pretty well in Australia back in the days when they played live and so on. And so I imagine there's a generation of people from that sort of new wave period that remember them from them. Rob, perhaps, do you have a long-term awareness of XTC?
Not so much myself. I was a bit of a late comer, but I do sort of think there's sort of 3 groups of people with XTC. They either haven't heard of them, they go, "Oh yeah, since it's working overtime, I remember that." And this is often if they're a musician themselves, they'll just go, their jaw will drop and they go, "I love that! I friggin' love that band," And so this is sort of really varied reaction to the band, but it's generally like either people love them or don't know who they are. But they got quite a profile in Australia. They toured here quite a bit, and John, you saw them live, I think.
Yeah, I saw them in 1980. So they toured here twice. They toured 79 and did a pub tour. And like they did an incredible number of gigs in, very small local hotels and clubs. And it was when it was just after Drums and Wires, so Dave Gregory was not that long in the band. And I was quite a few years too young to go to a pub then. But in the 1980 tour, they played theatres as well as pub shows, so I got to see them at a place called the Capitol Theatre. I guess there's a certain bunch of people over the age of 55 who saw them on those tours, and particularly on the first tour where the people went and saw them in pubs and saw them repeatedly. Yeah, there's definitely some quite a few old timers. I was just thinking before I got on here about how I found out about them myself. It would have been late 78 or early 79. I saw a film clip of Are You Receiving Me on Countdown, which was a national TV show here, which is generally written off as being really mainstream and a kind of top 40 show. And, to some degree it was. But they actually did a lot of stuff that was quite left of centre. Like they broke Blondie in Australia, they broke the B-52s in Australia. And to play Are You Receiving Me around the time it came out, that's hardly top 40 material, particularly not in Australia. So, I think they did get quite a bit of good attention early on.
Yeah, and what Rob is saying, I think it's true the world over that there are people who don't know who XTC are, and there are people who are obsessed by XTC, and there doesn't seem to be a sort of middle ground in the middle. But it's interesting that that there is enough of a market for people to keep on coming out. Les, how many times have you played at the same venue?
Oh, wow. Maybe 20, I guess, something like that. It's not a very frequent thing. And then we did have the bubonic plague in the middle of it all to slow things down. But we've been doing it how long? Maybe 6 years thereabouts.
I'd say it was longer than that, but yeah,
something like that.
We played once or twice a year. Yeah,
up to 3 or 4 times a year sometimes. I mean, yeah, 15 times, maybe 20. Yeah, it's possible.
And actually, on just on a practical level, as musicians, most touring bands, they'll do a concentrated period of, maybe months of touring and rehearsals and so on. How do you keep up to speed when you've got a relative, 20 gigs sounds a lot to me, but over a period of years, it's not that many. How do you keep up to speed on a musical level?
We're just fantastic.
That's a very good start.
We're all big fans, and the parts are often quite clear for everyone. Apart from John and I will get together a bit and sort out our guitar parts so we don't collide, or substitute keyboard parts for guitar. We have a keyboard, but we don't have a dedicated keyboard player. Nobody to sort of do orchestral replications, and that's something we don't actually go out to replicate necessarily. But I'd rather sort of have it sound like us playing it as to the best of our resources, I guess. Our activity kind of works around Jess, really, the drummer, who is also a percussionist for a lot of other. He does some Sydney Symphony gigs, and he does Australian Chamber Orchestra, and he's he's often a lot of musical like reading gigs, which tie him up for a couple of months at a time. So when he has a break, when he sees a gap coming, he'll book a gig, and we book a couple of rehearsals beforehand, and just to tidy things up. And we've actually, get it together pretty quickly, actually, because we've got a fairly lengthy song list. We like to add a couple each time, to a couple of newies in there, if possible. Everyone just seems to do their homework really well.
That must be the answer. I mean, you were being slightly facetious in your answer that you're all good musicians.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
But I think actually that's a genuine answer. You have to be good enough to do it. So these are complicated parts, aren't they? I mean, Rob, when you said that you were a sort of relative latecomer to XTC, did you have to be persuaded to join an XTC cover band?
Not at all. No, not by the time this came around. But I only really got into them when I was in my 20s. even though that all mostly happened by then. It was just I didn't really listen to a lot of music when I was young, and then I sort of discovered it later on. But so I wasn't really onto them until that age. But I'm sure these guys are into them well before that. But yeah, so, I mean, it's going on your last question. Learning the songs is they've done such a good job of writing them. It sort of makes it easy to learn in a way. It's definitely the case with the bass anyway. And Colin's he's just worked out every little note, and you just gotta play it. And it comes out, and it just sounds good. You know?
Rob does an astonishingly good job with Colin Moulding's bass parts. It's almost like Colin rewired Rob's mind at some stage. But Rob and Jess both work from. Well, Jess works from charts. He's that kind of musician, our drummer, and Rob has his own system of hieroglyphics, which he doesn't read so much as refer to occasionally. But yeah, I think that for me, it's just a period of woodshedding up, the week prior to the show, and then a rehearsal or two, and it seems to go pretty well. And I guess the thing is that even though we've got a long set list, a long sort of repertoire, as Les says, like we do 2 set shows, and we might do 25 tunes or so, and we played back in March, I think, and this time we're sort of doing half songs we did last time and half songs that we didn't do last time, and that kind of keeps it fresh for us. But also, I mean, we've got to the point where there are lots of songs that we've done a couple of times. So, I mean, I was playing the guitar before, and I was trying to remember how to play Scarecrow People properly, and there are a couple of chord voicings that are just kind of slipping my mind. But I know when I have a listen to the record again, they'll fall back into place. It's a terrific challenge, and it's terrific fun.
Let's talk about the foundation of the band, because as I understand it, you are in Petulant Frenzy, a Frank Zappa tribute band with Matt and Kendall, the trumpeter. Is there a relationship to the fact that you were already in a cover band?
Well, if I hadn't had Matt in the Frenzy, I wouldn't have known he was an XTC guy. So it all started one morning in a Facebook conversation. A random friend posted I think it was a Beach Boys clip of some sort, and everybody started fawning. And me being hilarious, instead of going, well, yes, I'm with you there, I sort of went, well, if I want to listen to rich, dense harmonies, I'd rather listen to this, and I put on something like probably That Wave, or it could have been Easter Theatre or something like that. And all these guys started coming in saying, Les, you've got to start with Smile, or giving me the big, not realizing I was just taking the mickey. But 3 guys jumped in and said, totally with you there. And it was John, Rob, and Jess, and so the 4 of us sort of had this little XTC love-in online before realizing that we're a drummer, bass player, and 2 guitars, and let's have a bit of a play one day. And of course, I asked Matt along, because I knew his in was going to a record shop and hearing Oranges and Lemons playing, and that was it. He was smitten. And Rob brought along his mate Ben, who sings as well. So we've got two front guys. And I thought, gee, some trumpet would be nice. Well, actually, I think the first time around was without Kendall, who wasn't aware of XTC, but like most musicians who like to have their ears tickled, there's a whole lot of XTC fans waiting to happen. They don't realise it yet. So we had a bit of a hit, and that sounded like fun. And Jess, being Jess, is immediately booked as a gig, of course. So it puts the pressure on, gun to the head. And about that time, I'm thinking, gee, trumpet would be nice, because I definitely lean towards the later period. I love all that stuff with Guy Barker all over it. So Kendall came along. I made up a little mixtape, and she loved it, of course. And that was it. We did the gig, and just try and stop us.
The first gig we did, we actually did a support to my and Jess's originals band called the Nature Strip, and I think any lover of XTC, plug, go and listen to our band, the Nature Strip.
Do it immediately.
So that was the first show we did, and I think Les is right. That was without Kendall, Les doesn't even really think of that as our first gig. It was just a sort of a hit out for 40 minutes. But then he said, let's get Kendall in. And the thing about Kendall is she's such a remarkable musician that she joined playing trumpet, and over a period of gigs, she's now this amazing utility player who, she plays trumpet exceedingly well, but she also plays bits and pieces on keyboard. She plays quite a bit of percussion, and she plays it really, really well. So we'll have really authentic things from the records, like
Hitting the anvil.
Yeah, hitting the anvil.
In the middle of Donkey as well. Shake Your Donkey.
And the anvil's for what? Towers of London.
Towers of London.
Yeah, so she does lots of just tricky tambourine bits and stuff. So it adds a hell of a lot of colour, to a 7-piece band, which is mostly guitars. I mean, Matt the singer does a bit of keyboards as well at times.
I watched the Shake You Donkey Up video that's online on YouTube, and was watching her doing exactly what you're describing. And there was, I think there's two things. There's a sort of crack noise that the
whip
that's there, and then there's also a sort of cymbal that feels like it's slightly out of time, but I can't, I'm not a good enough musician myself to know what it is that she's doing, but it's exactly like it is on the record. And I was kind of thinking that the advantage of having 7 people on stage for you is that you do have a better chance than like a 4-strong band at reproducing, particularly the studio years albums that XTC did, because there is so much studio stuff and additional sounds in there, so it really fills out the sound. From that point of view.
Again, it's not really about replication, but it's more about hey, wouldn't it be fun if we could get the initial cracking whip happening in Donkey? Why not? And the thing is, so Jess, as I was saying before, Jess does a lot of orchestral stuff, so he owns every piece of orchestral oddity you could imagine. As he says, like, you get to an orchestral gig and the conductor says, do you have a pair of coconut shells that are a semitone flat of the ones you just used? You have to be able to go, yes, I do, and pull them out. It's just how it works. Just keeps passing Kendall all of these odd objects to use, and Kendall comes from a classical background, so she just reads the hell out of anything. So between the two of them, they've got that neat and tidy area tied up beautifully.
The idea of this band has sort of been, I mean, we never spoke about it, but make the music sound the way we want and try and do justice to it, as opposed to like many other tribute bands, if you will, who have to sort of replicate the lineup as well. Like, you're not going to do a Rolling Stones show and not have a guy out the front doing Mick Jagger and a guy on the guitar. It was XTC. They weren't incredibly well known as being this live act because they stopped very early. So we don't have that sort of constraint. We can just go, hey, there's 7 of us here. I'm playing bass. I don't sing like Colin because I can't sing. And, we can just make the music come out the way we want and not be have to sort of copy or present the format that the original band actually had.
And of course, we all wanted to dress up as Andy, but
look, I guess the thing is that when we do stuff from Drums and Wires or Black Sea, and we did do the entire Black Sea album once, which was amazing, we can get fairly close to the original sound because it's basically 2 guitars, bass and drums, and a bit of keyboard and a bit of percussion. But I mean, I think a great example of what we do is, for one of our very early gigs, we decided to do Miniature Sun. And that's mostly keyboards. And Les came over here and we just nutted out what we thought the harmonies were and tried to create them with 2 guitars as best we could. So it's not quite like hearing Miniature Sun played with the instrumentation of Black Sea, but in a way it's a bit like, we're a bit more of a guitar-focused band, and perhaps that gives us a bit of our own spin on the material.
That was a particular favourite. Working on Miniature Sun was a particular favourite of mine because the concept was a chord can only contain 12 notes. Between us, we have 12 strings. We can play a 12-note chord if we have to. So basically, we sat there and it was more a matter of omission. Can you hear this note in that chord? Nope. Let's pull that one out. So the result of it is that John and I are both. I have no idea, no memory of what he's playing at all. We're playing two completely different chords to each other all the way through, just to fill it up, because they're so dense and there's a lot of semitone clusters going on in those
It's
chords.
glorious.
It was fun. It was fun. I kind of always really liked the idea of hearing that song with two slightly crunchy tellies playing these big, big chords, and it works nicely as a rock song too. So there you go.
And it is one of the things that I like about cover bands is that even sometimes a bad cover can reveal things about the song that you hadn't quite noticed before. You can just hear it in a different way, like you're saying. All those notes in that chord, you can think, that you can just lean into it and hear something that you might not have heard before.
And other things don't work at all. We tried. It was probably my idiotic insistence on doing Chalk Hills. I think Chalk Hills and Children. And we gave it a go, and we played all the right notes, and it was just wrong. It's all about the production.
I don't know. I think it kind of worked. I think it was kind of beautiful, but it's a hard thing to sell in a set because it's kind of slow. It's funny. Like we often do Yacht Dance, or trying to think of other sort of slowish songs we do, or 10 Feet Tall or something. But there's something, I really like the sound of what we did with Chalk Hills and Children. But there's something just so nebulous about it that it seems to fall flat with audiences somehow. That's my reading of it anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, but some of the cover bands that have existed and do exist sort of focus into that pre-1982 period where XTC were a very tight live unit and getting the crowd excited and so on. But maybe in your setting, in the Camelot Lounge, you're less, you feel less obliged to get the crowd jumping up and down and throwing themselves around in quite the same way, even despite what you're saying about Chalk Hills and Children.
Yeah, I think that's the case. At the end of the day, we are generally more fans of their later stuff too, so that sort of comes out in what we play.
That's not the case.
John's nodding his head.
So John. The reason John does the set list is because we know that we're going to get a good cross section. Whereas it's left up to Rob and I, for example, it's just going to be late period stuff, and nobody will dance.
And Matt as well. Matt's also a late period. I think it's really important to have a representation of their material right across their career. We've probably only ever learnt 4 or 5 songs from the Barry Andrews period, but I'd say we do 2 of those every time we play. And I feel like if you're a real hardcore XTC fan and you went and saw a band like us and you didn't do anything from the Barry Andrews era, I'd certainly mark a band down for that. I mean, I'd still really dig it. But yeah, I mean, I kind of think that it'd be really nice to do a song or 2 more from Apple Venus, because we've only ever done I'd Like That. And of course, that's the most ambitious record to try and cover. But I mean, we've done several songs from Wasp Star, so I feel like we have that final era tends to get represented with a few songs as well. You know what I mean? So Les is right, though. If he was doing the set list, it'd be nothing before English Settlement.
And have you had that experience that I have? My experience watching EXTC is that you get the XTC songbook, because they do cover the pre and post Terry Chambers. Even though Terry Chambers is in it, they do cover the pre and post Terry Chambers era, and because it's the same band playing them, all of these songs, it sort of gives this material a unity that you might not otherwise realize just listening to the records. And I wonder whether that sense of the songbook, in the same way that you might get a Gershwin songbook or a Cole Porter songbook, does that sort of come across to you, that John particularly, I suppose, given what you're saying about getting that whole range of material, does it feel to you that it is the same team of musicians who created this in the first place?
Absolutely. But I think to me it's more about the uniqueness of the songwriting. So I think that you can definitely hear a line between, say, Mechanic Dancing and Omnibus. There's an eccentric person bouncing off the walls in both of them, and maybe for the more pastoral tunes, like maybe something like East of Theatre, which is, you know, one of Les and my, I mean, I think it might be Les's favourite XTC song.
And mine, definitely.
And it's definitely way up there for me too. And it's one we should probably attempt at some stage, though it might be fraught with peril. I guess that you can't sort of go as far back into their discography to sort of find another song that does something like that. But, you know, between Andy's songwriting, Colin's bass playing, Andy's voicings on the guitar, and also the playing of Terry Chambers and Dave Gregory, of course, are just full of personality and imagination. And but I guess they might not be quite the same through lines as those other things I mentioned, simply because Andy and Colin are the only people who went the whole distance with the band, with, you know, the recorded output. And I think that you're exactly right. You know, playing Miniature Sun with a focus on two guitars does bring out the similarities between something like that and, say, Road Skirt or The Globe, which again is a kind of a beef-hearty and, you know, collision of timbres and notes.
But at the same time, it's also true to say that you haven't, as well, at least the stuff that I've seen on YouTube, you haven't tried to do a completely radical reworking. You haven't suddenly decided, oh, let's do Chalk Hills and Children as a bluegrass song. You haven't sort of made a massive leap. You're still in the broad area of the
For sure
of the originals.
We don't have complete disrespect for the songs.
No, we try to capture the spirit of the songs, you know, without feeling like we need to be slavishly derivative of the recordings, you know.
And there's an advantage in having two singers, in that you can also reproduce harmonies that existed on the original records as well, which is a nice touch, I always think.
Yeah, that's a big thing, you know, not being constrained to pull out all those harmonies that get done on their you know, latter records. Having two people that can just you know, concentrate on that and not
or four.
Yeah.
I mean, when John sings
And
and Jess sings, and you got Kendall. We whip out occasionally for bits and pieces like intro to Dear God, of course. Any little high moments that are a bit of fun. But between the four guys, there's definitely the ability to do things like Wheel and Maypole outro. There's a lot of stacked harmonies, and it's like a singing rounds almost on that one. So, well, it's exactly like singing rounds on that. Yeah.
And or when we did Omnibus, you know, the harmonies in that.
Yeah. Or the outros of This World Over and Wake Up, which are really densely layered, and we give them a good old shot, you know, and it's a lot of fun. But yeah, Ben and Matt together. Matt sings probably 3/4 of the lead vocals, and Ben sort of probably does, you know, maybe 5 or 6 at each show, but he's there as a constant presence as a backing vocalist. So because there's a lot of 2-part harmonies on what they do, and Jess and I chip in with 3rd and 4ths whenever it's needed. And I mean, you know, Jess will sing as much as we let him, really.
Rob, from the point of view of as a bass player, examining in that sort of detail that you have to the bass parts that Colin Moulding laid down in the first place, from a musician's point of view, is that revelatory? Is it fascinating? What does it feel like to sort of explore how another musician has gone about creating that work?
Well, I spent a lot of time when I was young learning songs off records, so sort of used to you know, discovering how bass players come up with stuff and what they play. But Colin's quite unique in that it's just so well written. This could sound like a negative thing, but there's not much interpretation left so much. It's the notes, the actual patterns of notes are so melodic and in the right spot that there's no point where you go, okay, well, here he's sort of doing this sort of thing. He just does a bit of that now and then. It's all very exact and all the work's done. It's a beautiful work of art on its own. It's really good to play it and people come along and they see this music that I think a lot of people wouldn't appreciate until they see a whole band doing it in front of them. I've got a lot of friends who wouldn't necessarily, as non-musicians, wouldn't be able to hear it on a record if I played it to them. They go, this is really great music, and it wouldn't hit them. But when they come to our shows, they sort of see a physical representation of everybody playing these instruments, coming out this music, and it really grabs them, I think, visually.
So we're a gateway band.
I've sort of digressed from your question. Yes.
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating digression, and it's making me wonder as well whether it's affected your playing in other bands and your own music. What sort of influence has it had on you?
I think a little bit. I think what I naturally play is quite different, but it's taught me, if you really can nail something here and write something well here and it sounds good now, it's always going to sound good rather than going, I sort of do this rough ballpark thing here. It sort of taught me that sort of thing. I know that.
Rob played in a legendary inner-city band called the Magic Lunchbox, and a lot of his bass parts in that were already showing signs of moulding. And there was a lot of really unusual lines in there, so he was predisposed to that way of thinking bassline wise.
Yeah, definitely a big influence.
Yeah, and Les and John, from a guitarist point of view, we've got music that's originated either from Andy Partridge or from Dave Gregory. Andy strikes me as a fascinating, brilliant guitarist, very, very inventive and unusual, and will sometimes claim that what he's playing is quite simple, but it sounds complicated. Whereas Dave, being more of a muso and more of a thinking technically about how guitar parts sound, is maybe more in the traditional line of musicianship. Shall I start with Les? It's the same question that I was asking to Rob. How have you found getting under the skin of that music?
Yeah, well, John comes from, there's a bit more of the garage vibe in John's playing. He embraces the edge a little bit, whereas I was sort of weaned on Gilmour. I'm about, how old are you, John?
I'm 57.
So I'm 61. So there's only 4 years, which is nothing now. But when you're 16, it's a lot of years. So while I was sort of coming through being like a Deep Purple obsessive and Pink Floyd and then into the Zappa thing, punk came along and I was way above that. Whereas John was right in he would have been right in the zone for that. So he took on a lot more of the Andy-like traits, I guess, pre-Andy. So he already had that stuff going. So for better or worse, I tend to take on the Dave parts. And to be perfectly honest, in an ideal world, I'd be sitting in the audience watching the rest of the guys play with a different guitarist who could play the Dave parts much better than me. Maybe even Dave, but I like playing it, so that's it. But some of those approaching Dave lines can be just terrifying. I get the cold sweats whenever it's time to give a little bit of a nod to the solo in That Wave, for example. Oh my God!
I think even Dave, when he looks back at some of the pieces of music that he's played, he thinks, "I couldn't play that now."
Yeah, well, he'd say that, but he's one of my favourite players. He's incredible, just incredible.
Yeah, Les. I think Les has sort of nailed something there. But I guess from my perspective, I love Dave's playing, and I love the way that Andy and Dave play together. Like Black Sea and English Settlement are two of my favourite records of all time, just for the two guitar interplay. I mean, then you add the songwriting to that. And I love the way that, like, to my mind, Les does that Dave Gregory stuff really, really well. He doesn't think he does it as well as he does. But he also adds to me these shades of Dave Gilmour and Frank Zappa. It's just part of his psyche. So when he's, making, seagully feedback noises in This World Over, yeah, they totally do something that's on the record, but they're also a bit kind of, black napkins at the same time. And I love the fact that he brings that to the music. For my part, I think that Andy Partridge's voicings on the guitar are central to the character of his songs. There's no one else who voices guitar chords like that. I think that it's hard to get to the bottom of it. There's sometimes, like, I remember when I worked out what I thought the intro chords on the guitar of Respectable Street were. And it's like, that is amazing. Who would do that? And it just sounds so amazing. And similarly, the riff that starts Mechanic Dancing, it just it fills me with awe and all kinds of. I just can't describe how I feel about that riff, playing that riff, and so and he's been an enormous influence on my songwriting and my guitar playing. But also I hear the Captain Beefheart in it. I hear that collision of guitars. I hear that kind of, Andy's more judicious with his use of chromaticism, but I definitely hear a connection there. And Les is kind of right about, I'm not sure about garagey, but definitely when punk and post-punk came along, I was like, give it to me. Give me Television, give me Wire, give me XTC, give me Talking Heads. And all these artists have these angular guitar parts that mesh together. And I think, like I was saying before, I think that's something that we bring to some of the later material because it's there in the harmony. It's just not necessarily the way that they recorded those songs later in their career.
And Rob made the point that reminded me of something that I've said and observed before, is that it seems to me that with XTC songs, a bit like Beatles songs, that the arrangement and the song are sort of the same thing. So the reason that you don't do a bluegrass version of Chalk Hills and Children is because then it sort of ceases to be Chalk Hills and Children anymore. And the actual, if you veer too much, unless you're brilliantly imaginative and can have a completely radical version that works, on the whole, you kind of need to play that bass line in that place, and you need to have that type of guitar with that particular voicing. Otherwise, it somehow isn't the song in a way that other songs are a bit more open to interpretation. I don't know if you think that's the case, Les.
Definitely, yeah, no, that's it for sure. It's the parts can be very specific. It's a little bit like trying to add cymbals to Ringo's guitar part in something. It ceases to be that song. It's so immaculately written. Even going back to the touring years, and I should point out that I actually really love playing those songs. I don't love the first two albums, but I love playing the songs. I think it's the Andy vocal delivery that I'm a bit sensitive. I just can't do it. Sorry. Never mind.
Did a seal attack you when you were young, Les?
Yes, maybe you did. through a bad PA. Anyway.
But that's interesting, though, that when you actually put them on stage yourself, you then do enjoy playing them.
Yeah, well, just bang away on those bizarre guitar parts and see people bouncing around. It's pretty gratifying. Yeah, it's fun.
But how does it? Is there a sort of comparison? Does it feel at all the same thing that when you're doing Frank Zappa covers? Is the atmosphere similar? Is the approach similar? Does it feel like something different to being in an XTC tribute band?
Well, the Zappa band's been doing it for a lot longer and more sporadically, but a lot longer. We've been through various stages of looseness or taking liberties. Occasionally, it sort of gets really tight with depending on who's in the band. My intention with both bands is pretty similar in that I don't want to replicate sounds. I want to play a lot of the right notes. I'd like to play all the right notes. In the case of, for example, Miniature Sun, I do like the idea of hearing the unexpected. In the case of Zappa, that Frank did that all the time. He changed things all the time, so I don't mind doing that. The other funny observation with the gigs, when we do Frenzy gigs, Zappa gigs, and the Scarecrows gigs, I would say that there's a good 50% of the audience is common to both gigs.
That's interesting. I was just thinking, because there must be a crossover between people who appreciate a similar sort of adventurousness in music, I suppose.
Yeah, and I see it all the time on Facebook pages, XTC Facebook pages and Zappa pages, and there's a lot of the same guys on both, and there's a lot of cross-pollination. Of course, you come across the XTC tragics who don't like Zappa because of the clash of harmonies. They just love the beauty of a lot of the XTC stuff, and they don't particularly like things like That Wave or Travels. But that's their loss.
Yeah, they're wrong, of course. Rob, does it feel different? Do you have a preference for playing if you are in Magic Lunchbox or whatever? If do you prefer playing your own stuff, or is it equally rewarding being in a band like this?
It's very different. I've always found original stuff, even if you really enjoy it and it's really something you want to do, and you're in a band doing something you want to do musically, it's still quite a stress because you're sort of trying to write and do everything and hold the whole thing together. This is quite different, and I really enjoy this because I'm in a band with a whole bunch of other professionals, and like someone mentioned before, everyone's done their homework, not in terms of us learning the music, but XTC themselves and writing the music, and all this homework's done. And so it all comes together. As long as you're all switched on, you bring your amps and you got your parts worked out, it just all comes together so well. And it doesn't feel like you're sort of trying to hold everything together and make it work, because it's just already there.
Mm.
And John, as the person who comes up with the set list, what have you got in store for the gig that you're just working on at the moment?
There's a few things we haven't done for a little while, which are back in the set, like Vanishing Girl and Omnibus is in there. So, I mean, it's just the usual kind of cross-section. I think there's, Paper and Iron's getting another run. That's a particular favourite of mine. It's always a bit of a... I feel completely spent after playing Paper and Iron. It's like running a marathon on the guitar. I guess I could also sort of answer that question about, how it feels doing this compared to other groups that I do. Another group that I play in, aside from the Nature Strip, the Originals thing, which I think does have some crossover with XTC stylistically. I do a yacht rock group. It's called the Smooth Sailing Yacht Rock Review. And there's some crossover between the audiences that come to that and come to XTC as well. And I guess they're the people who are just like, give me the late 70s, early 80s. That's when I felt fantastic, and that's where a lot of music I love comes from. But it's interesting because that music's very challenging too. The harmonies, the chords are very jazz harmony influenced, and it's a real workout to play that music, but it's so much more mellow and transparently fun. I mean, not that Scarecrow People XTC is terrific fun, but the yacht rock stuff is lighthearted fun. I like nearly all the material we do. I'm not sort of the leader of that band, and there are a couple of songs I could probably do without, but playing a song like Steely Dan's Hey 19 is just hilarious. It's funny. So
well, it's either yacht rock or yacht dance for you, John, isn't it?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. But look, Mark, I don't know if you're sort of wanting to wind up, but I was just wondering if you know the story of the last gig that we played, because it's a good story, and I'd be good to tell it.
Yeah, do go ahead. No, I don't know it.
What happened was we had this gig. We had this gig booked. I think it was in was it in March? We'd had 2 rehearsals booked. Anyway, Rob came down with COVID the morning of the show. So we're like, we're on this messenger thread or something, of email text thread, and it's like, well, you can't just learn the bass parts for an XTC band overnight. We can't play. So I text the booker and I say, look, our bass player's come down with COVID. We can't play because no one can learn this shit in a day. And they came back to us and said, you have to play. You have to find a way to play. We can't afford for you not to play. Because, COVID has really, really decimated some venues' business. So we're like, shit, what do we do? And we canvassed a whole bunch of options over about, an hour and a half. And then Ben, our second singer, said, I can play drums, and I've been practicing to XTC records. And Jess, our drummer, is just a phenomenal musician who is an amazing bass player. So with no rehearsal whatsoever, one of our singers is playing drums and our drummer is playing bass. and we did the show. And there were a couple of songs that weren't fantastic, but 90% of them were really, like, if you didn't know the band, like, I mean, we miss Rob terribly because he's just amazing at that stuff. But if there are people who didn't know the band, they would have come in that night and said, oh, that song was a bit rusty, but otherwise, weren't they amazing?
It's amazing what just did. I mean, he must have gone through the songs and notated them all out, and he was standing there reading what he'd notated. But I don't know how. There's no way in the world I could have done anything like that at the last minute. It's just incredible effort.
It was necessity and cold sweat, I think.
Yes.
Poor Jess.
Yeah, I mean, it must have just for you, even if it hadn't been successful, and it sounds like it was successful, but it must have just been so exhilarating to come off stage at the end to know that you got through that.
It was ridiculous. And I mean, the other thing that's worth mentioning is that Matt had to do the lead vocals on the songs that Ben usually sang. So, he had another 5 or 6 songs to learn as well. Just, we ran about 4 or 5 songs at soundcheck, and the rest of them, the other 20 songs, we played in that lineup for the first time ever in front of the audience. It's just madness.
But we started off talking about you as musicians and being very capable musicians, and musicians capable enough to be able to, just do 2 or 3 shows a year or whatever it might be. And it's reminding me, in fact, that one of the motives behind doing my second XTC book, What Do You Call That Noise, was to get a musician's eye insight into the band and to hear the band like musicians hear the band. And it strikes me talking to you that XTC are musicians. They may not be the most famous band in the world, but you scratch a musician and you quite quickly quite often discover that they are XTC fans. I mean, is that maybe coming back to Les? It was the thing that you found with your Zappa colleagues that there was that almost secret enthusiasm.
Well, there's no doubt. Also, my day job is guitar repairs, so I'm getting a lot of guitarists coming through, and of course it's blah 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 about music the whole time, and the topic invariably comes up, and who are XTC? And I've got my little playlist, so I force them to listen to it while I noodle about with their semi-functional guitars. And it's very rare that there's disinterest. I'll pick the audience, I'll know who's going to go for something like Yacht Dance or That Wave or Complicated or whatever, but it's a case of once you're in, and it's a pretty broad pool to investigate. But I've definitely alerted a whole bunch of guys to the existence, and they're most grateful, I believe.
Is that what you found as well, John, in other groups that you've been in?
Yeah, look, I think that there's a general agreement with a lot of musicians of my age that I know, who I play with, that XTC are one of the best bands of the last 40, 50 years, and their music is to be cherished. But it's interesting, there are people I meet that XTC has just sort of passed by, or people's tastes are so particular, that Les sort of talks about this huge crossover between Petulant Frenzy's audience and Scarecrow People's audience, and Zappa and XTC, and I'm sure that's true. But I can imagine some people who love XTC who just find Zappa's music unbearable, like kind of the humor really naff, and the music unnecessarily complicated in a kind of show-offy way or whatever. And by the same token, I'm sure there are people who love Zappa who just find XTC abrasive in the early years, and perhaps a little too pure pop on a record like Skylarking. So, there's no accounting for taste. Everyone has their own pleasure centers, and I think it is a generational thing too. I personally don't know that many younger XTC fanatics, and I wonder if there are that many of them out there, say people under 40 who love XTC. You probably know better than I do, Mark. Are there a lot of them out there?
Well, I did do one podcast where I didn't appear at all, and I just got the young generation to talk enthusiastically and very articulately. They were brilliant at doing it, and so they do exist. And I, sometimes, what was it? I think a bit of Dear God appeared in the movie It, and the Stephen King thing, and that sort of introduces a new audience to them. So and the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, I think, has used tracks. Think so somehow people find their way there. But yeah, it's never been they've never been a sort of mainstream choice, and so and I think that sort of continues to be the way. But I don't know, Rob, maybe just to finish off, do you have the sense from being on the stage that I've had from being in the audience, that when you get a whole set of XTC songs played live, that it feels like in some parallel universe they should have been as big as any other band that you could mention?
Yeah, to a degree, yeah. I think it's something we've all thought about. We all have sort of slightly different opinions on, but the fact they stopped playing live didn't help their career. And I think, even going on back to the point about Frank Zappa, they're two bands that cover a lot of musical ground, like they were all over the place. And I think that doesn't help a band become huge. If you're too eclectic, people can't get a handle on you. And I think that's definitely the case with XTC. So, and especially we play stuff from White Music to Wasp Star, and that's such every song's so different. And I sort of go, this is amazing music, and I love it as much as ever. But I part of me thinks, well, because it's so different and so just covers so many worlds of music, that maybe is part of the reason why they never broke through that sort of barrier as well. I don't know if I'm right or not, but I do think if they played more and toured a lot more, they would have gone a lot further in that sense. But fortunately that they didn't, and they were free to make incredibly complex albums that nobody can play properly again.
You're still trying.
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, very good luck with the gig that's coming up and all future gigs, and well done for flying the flag for XTC. I have to give a special vote of thanks to Les, who, despite his articulacy, is suffering from back injury and is not at all well at the moment. So good luck to Les for sorting that all out. And fantastic to talk to you, John and Rob. Thank you very much for joining us, and good luck.
What do you call that noise?
Thank you very, very much, Les, John, and Rob, and all the fantastic Scarecrow People, who you can see at the Camelot Lounge, Marrickville in Sydney on Saturday, the 29th of October. That's a postponed date after COVID problems earlier in the year. Many, many thanks, as always, to the podcast supporters on Patreon who make it all possible, including the following: Knights in Shining Karma, Terry Arnott, Kevin Burt, Cale Corbett, Liam Duggan, Jamie Dunn, Leslie Gooch, Robert Graham, Alan Hughes, Marek Kraus, Jesper Kumberg, Robert Lawlaw, Dennis LeCourrier, Liz Lynch, Yusuf Murrah, Amy Parkinson, Murray Meikle, Karen Neal, Doug Perry, Mark Reed, James Reimer, Simon Slatehome, Michael Sutcliffe, Mark Thomas, and Nigel Waller. And if you'd like to support the XTC podcast, you can do so at the level that suits you at patreon.com/Mark Fisher. We'll be back next month with the Fossil Fools, and then of course it's the XTC convention. So looking forward to meeting and talking XTC with you for many months to come. Bye.